Wow, where to start with this fight? I know most of you know that I rock with Spence, and throughout the build-up of this fight, the narrative that I ran with was not dissimilar to anyone else who tried to base their decision on past fights, because that is essentially how we reach a rational conclusion. And my conclusion was based on the fact that 1, Spence was supposedly the bigger man, his punches were typically impactful, and I mean to the point where he had broken multiple fighters' orbital bones. And lastly, Spence is known for his relentless pressure and was yet to come across a fighter who could even come close to matching that pressure, although I guess you could argue Porter. What I didn't count on, and I think what most of you guys who picked Spence to win the fight, was that Crawford was clearly built for this weight class, because the man looked like a tank and he made Spence look like a child. And I am going to expand on that in a second, but first we have to call this for what it is. This was a spectacular performance from Terence Crawford, and he leaves no doubt that he is the undisputed champ in 2 weight classes, and in this peak physical condition I can't see who can beat him. And I'm not just referring to skill. So let's evaluate what actually happened in the fight. Round 1, whichever fighter you had winning the fight, I would say things went as we all expected. Spence was the aggressor, he took control of the center of the ring, and Crawford was trying to get his timing down. However, at this elite level, I'm starting to think that Crawford plays possum, because round 1, Spence looked like the fighter in control, and that continued on to round 2 as well. With just 21 seconds left, Crawford catches Spence off guard with a lead follow-up jab, which puts him to the canvas. And I don't know about you guys, but this was reminiscent of when Crawford dropped Kell Brook with the short counter jab. And the general consensus was that, well, Crawford can't possess that much power to knock a man down with what looks like a glancing short jab. So some of us have assumed since that Kell Brook just wasn't doable anymore. But the way Crawford dropped Spence in this round, whether it was an impactful shot or not, essentially set the foundation of what was to come round by round until Spence's early demise. And I've got to say, as a fan of Spence, it wasn't tough to watch. I was just more so confused. And if you were backing Spence, please let me know if you share my perspective. And I'm going to digress just a little bit, because from rounds 2 to 9, I kept asking myself, why are Spence's shots not hurting Crawford? And I don't mean the glancing shots. I mean the shots where Spence looks like he's putting full force into those shots, and Crawford is like a rock. No change in facial expression. The bigger man, Spence, looked like the smaller man in there. And if you follow Crawford's training regime, we know he performs a lot of deadlifting, and of course he has a wrestling background. But this was just different. Crawford in this fight is at his physical peak. And I've already seen some speculation in the chat that Crawford might be on gear. Just to make it clear, I don't think that at all. I think this was a man who felt his back was against the wall and trained like his life depended on it. I've weight trained naturally all my life, and when I was in my physical prime, when you put in the work that the average man or a juice head can't fathom, going above and beyond naturally can increase your testosterone and durability. And in my opinion, that was on show tonight. Crawford trained like his life depended on it, and once Spence realized his biggest punches weren't hurting, he looked like he was in a bad dream. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, when you feel like there's nothing you can do to win in a situation, so the world starts moving in slow motion. And after round 2, Spence did not look himself. And to be clear, that's because of Crawford. But Spence looked like he was stuck in mud. He was bewildered by the situation he was in, the biggest fight of his life, and yet nothing would faze the man in front of him. Listen, as a fan of Spence, it was incredible to see. But as I said, I digress. Back to round 3, Spence comes out really aggressive. He has Crawford on the back foot, but for Crawford it's by design. He's giving Spence that control, and from Spence's perspective, he understands he needs to assert his dominance straight away, because that is his game, being on the front foot and stalking his prey. But we see in round 3, that's where he begins to look like he's stuck in mud. In fact, I would go as far as to say this is where we start to see Spence possibly having an adrenaline dump, because from here he really isn't fighting smart. His guard is low, he has his head forward, and he's susceptible to the counter uppercut. At least this is what I was thinking live. And he's throwing these lunging hooks which really aren't his style, at least in terms of his usual center of gravity. When Spence usually throws hook combinations, as I've mentioned in my tactical breakdown, he has the movement of a sprinter. He's centered and focused, which also aids in his defense against counter shots. But here he is against one of the greatest counter fighters in the game, and Spence is wide open, but Crawford takes his time. Crawford mainly stays on the outside. He begins to establish his jab, throwing the occasional double jab, and it's this round 3, where Crawford identifies he can beat Spence to the jab, not only in speed but also in impact. Round 4, Spence is on the offensive, but again he's off balance, lunging into a clinch situation and looking flustered as Crawford retains a calm demeanor. opener. There's a lot of inside clinch work from Spence, but again, it looks like he's in a bad dream. He's not looking like a professional boxer. Doesn't seem like there's the usual pep in his punch. And in round 4, you can really tell that Crawford knows he has this in the bag. He just has to be patient and wait for his shot. Mid-round, Crawford throws a beautiful jab to left hook that lands clean, gets a big reaction out of the audience. And you'll have to excuse my analogy here, but Spence is looking at Crawford like he's the big boss, with power attributes through the roof. And you can tell Crawford feels like the big boss. Throughout the end of round 4, Crawford really asserts his dominance here, with Spence throwing a fast jab and getting countered by a fast jab. We're seeing a lot of wear and tear on Spence's face at this point, and it's hard to tell if he's hurt or again if he's flustered by the situation. But Crawford has been in complete control from the end of round 2 to the end of round 4. In fact, ending the round with Spence's signature body uppercuts. Just before round 5 begins, the doctor checks up on Spence and there's a big boo from the crowd. Spence says he's ready to go, but I've got to be honest, based on Spence's performance so far, I wouldn't have been opposed to the fight being stopped, simply because at this stage, it was clear he wasn't performing like the elite fighter he usually is when he's in control. However, the fight continued, and this time Spence is more hesitant on the offense, with both men in the center of the ring, but Crawford just throwing snapping jabs, followed up by double right hooks, which seem to be generating a lot of power, leaving Spence trying to get his footing. I mean, every fundamental punch that Crawford lands is making Spence second guess himself, but Spence knows he has no option other than be the pressure fighter he's always been. So every time he gets rocked, he instantly moves forward, throwing slow jabs and leaving himself open to counters. And towards the end of round 5, Crawford is clearly feeling himself, as he should. He's getting confident, changing up his defense, doing the shoulder roll, switching stances, throwing double jabs, and ending with a blistering left hook. Spence is just getting outclassed at this point, throwing lunging left hooks with his chin high in the air. And towards the end of round 5, Crawford, stoic, as strong as an ox, plants his feet and counters with stiff jabs, which have Spence on wobbly legs. And one thing has to be said about Crawford at this stage. He's brutal, but he's fair, because there are plenty of times where Spence is tying up and he's unsure of himself, trying to exit the pocket, and every time Crawford obliges. No cheap shots, and although I do think that's due to his character, I also mostly think it's because he knows he's got this fight in the bag. And it's towards the end of round 5 where we see Crawford now begin to walk Spence down, and this continues on to round 6, where Crawford looks like a stocky middleweight, just moving forward, taking Spence out of his element and choosing to be on the offensive, throwing first. But midway through the round, Spence attempts to assert his dominance, but ends up getting countered by a hook. He remains standing, but he's playing such a dangerous game, with Crawford now going back to his counters, doubling up his jab. But there is a moment towards the end of the round where Spence almost looks like his former self, but the pop just isn't there in his punch. Round 6 essentially ends with Crawford standing his ground and playing with his food. Round 7, Spence comes out aggressive, and he looks like he's regained some of that speed, but he's not thinking defensively, and Crawford continues to land stiff counter jabs, where you can see instantly Spence is moving once again like he's stuck in mud, but this time Crawford capitalizes, and in the middle of the round, he puts Spence to the canvas. With literally 2 seconds remaining, Crawford puts Spence down with a follow-up left hook. Round 8 begins. Spence looks like he's got his bearings, but Crawford takes the center of the ring, and Spence is on the back foot. Spence is landing the occasional jab, but in comparison, Crawford's jabs are lightning fast. It's almost like a sparring session, with one fighter feeling the pressure of the limelight. You could even say the embarrassment, the biggest fight of his life. In disbelief, everything is going wrong, but to Spence's credit, he keeps pushing forward, and despite some close calls, he survives round 8 without getting knocked down. Round 9 begins, and Spence is completely shot, throwing snail-paced hooks, and watching this round again really validates that he's going through an adrenaline dump. Crawford remains calm and collected. There's no sense of urgency on his side, often with a high guard, blocking Spence's flurries and not budging an inch. And once Crawford really establishes that nothing Spence throws is hurting him, Crawford makes it look like easy work. Spence is predictable, and Crawford just lays it on him, starting with the stiff jab and ending with perfectly placed hooks, leading to the ref stopping the fight. I mean, what a great fight, man. And as I said before, it leaves no doubt that Crawford is the rightful undisputed champ of the welterweight division. Now the big question is, where does Terence Crawford go from here? Well, what we do know is that Errol Spence was looking ahead to take on Canelo Alvarez, which I personally felt would be a tall order for Errol Spence. But now that Errol Spence just got dismantled by an immovable rock, I would love to see that immovable rock go up against another immovable rock in Canelo Alvarez. Because after that performance, it validates that every win Crawford has had beforehand was not luck, was not chance, and I think to further his legacy, and especially at his age, age. I mean, the man's about to be 36 years old. Crawford deserves that big money fight. Guys, let me know in the comment section what you thought of the fight. I mean, listen, I'm already getting hit up by multiple Crawford fans telling me how wrong I was, asking if I'm alright, laughing emojis, telling me not to cry. But I did tell you guys, I'm a man of integrity. I was wrong. In fact, I was way off. And whatever the circumstances which led to a lackluster performance from Spence, it doesn't matter. On the night he was supposed to shine, he didn't. And that was due to Crawford. Guys, make sure you drop a like on this video. Help my channel grow. I love this sport and I want to be covering these types of matches. So please consider that when you watch my videos. But most importantly, let me know in the comments who you were rooting for and how you're feeling right now. Because I'm feeling crushed. I mean, I'm actually starting to empathize with Southpaw TV here. Anywho, take care guys. See you in the comments and have a great weekend. Peace.